Okay, everybody, we're here to talk about the midterm exam. It's in two parts. The first part is the memo/essay, and I've read a number of those already in the pre-read. Still a couple days to have that done if you want to have it done. They look pretty good. Just pay attention to the directions. You need to have, that introduction, the brief explanation of what ESRM is, because this person that you're writing to doesn't know that. You'll need to have two examples of how you would put that into practice a little bit, just real brief examples so it helps to facilitate the understanding of what you're trying to do. And then you're going to be asking for their buy-in and their support so that you can get a group together and talk about how you're going to implement it at your facility. So just make sure you read the directions and you cover each one of those things. If you do, and your grammar and your spelling and your word usage is good, your tone of your memo is good, there is a rubric that I'll use, and if you cover those points, you'll do great. So the second half, though, is a quiz type exam, and I know how you all love those. But let's go over some of the things that may or may not be on that exam, and what I would, if I were you, concentrate on as far as studying or preparing or getting your documents ready to take the quiz. So I refer to it as a quiz because it is in the quiz section of D2L. So that's where you'll go find the midterm exam, is in the quiz section. It'll be labeled midterm exam. And it's multiple choice. There's some true false. I think, for the most part, the way that the thing should populate for everybody, it's probably about a 70-30 mix for just about everybody, because I think that's the mix I have in the overall bank of questions. But sometimes it could be a little bit off on that. But mostly multiple choice. And you pick the best answer. And I know that throws some folks because there may be two answers. One of them is sort of correct, but in each one of these sets of answers, there is one that is clearly correct. That's the one that you should concentrate on. So don't get too hung up on overanalyzation here. If there's a question, if there's an answer that is the best answer, that's the one you choose. As you can imagine, there's quite a few questions on ESRM. So understand what that means, both the abbreviation, Enterprise Security Risk Management, ESRM, and the definition of ESRM, and that is in the lectures. But understand the definition, that it is a holistic look. That's probably the key words you want to remember. It looks at risk across an entire organization, not just at the security manager's view of risk. The process is owned by everybody that's part of the ESRM model, led by the security manager, because the security manager can't be a expert on every risk that an organization has. My own organization I've worked for 30 plus years. I cannot tell you what the main risk to our supply chain might be today, because we have 300-400 products in the supply chain, a number of raw materials, a multiple of those number of products. So someone has to tell me that. What's the most important, most vulnerable raw material that's coming across our supply chain? So as a subject matter expert on ESRM, I am not the expert on what risks affect the organization. So that is why you really need to bring in those other people. They own this process. You lead and facilitate it, right? So know the steps. In Unit 2, there was a list of steps in ESRM. It wasn't all-inclusive because there are more steps, but know the ones that were listed. Remember, the context of your answers is always what you learned in this class thus far. So go to Unit 2 and look for those ESRM model steps. We had a unit on working with HR, and one of the things that kept coming to the surface was the background checks, because that's an important crossover between HR and security. And you really need to understand what a background check is and what it is not. Okay, and that was mentioned in the lecture. It's not something that you can look at and just say, okay, I can't hire this person because they have an arrest for whatever. It's really not an evaluation. It is simply a list of the things that person has done. It's a history, right? And the evaluation has to go on between the security manager, the HR person, any other entities that you might deem necessary, as long as you're within the privacy laws, to discuss it with, to find out what the circumstances were, right? Because an HR person is not going to be the only people who hire someone. The hiring manager has the ultimate responsibility. So if I request a new security guard for a facility somewhere in Egypt, I'm the one who's responsible for making sure the right person gets hired. No one sends a guy to me and says, there's your new security guard, live with it. No, if I'm hiring that person in Egypt, I need to make sure that I have a say in who that person's going to be. So even though HR is very important in the hiring process, the actual hiring authority is the hiring manager in almost every organization you're ever going to work with. So there's quite a few questions on finance because I think it's something that most everybody gets to their first job and is absolutely clueless on. And I'm just trying to give you the high-level buzzwords and a basic understanding of some of the things that you'll come across because everybody does finance a little differently. Obviously, when you report, tax forms, things like that are all standard, but everybody has their little nuances. But I'm just trying to give you the high-level stuff. And we talked about line item budgeting. It's just one way to outline your operational and your capital spending plans, right? Line items can be done any number of ways, but we talked about zero-based and cost-based. Zero-based takes the longest to prepare, but you basically are starting with blanks in every spot, and you're figuring out from scratch what you're going to spend on any certain line item, be it communications or vehicles or manpower or consultants, whatever your line item happens to be. But on cost-based, which is the other one, you're starting with what you spent last year and making some adjustments. So in one, you justify every ask. Everything you're going to ask for is fully justified. The other one, you're saying, here's my history, here's what I spent before, and I believe history is going to hold. So both of them have their pros and cons. Not everybody zero bases every year. Most places, in fact, will only zero base every 3 or 4 years, just to do a gut check to make sure that we're just not adding on spend to a bad plan, right? But just know that line item budgeting can be done 2 ways, zero-based and cost-based. That is what we learn in this course. Again, there are other ways of creating budgets, but that's what we learned here. Those are the main budgeting terms you'll need to know. Also in finance, make sure you understand the concepts of procurement. We talked a little bit about direct and indirect procurement. And indirect procurement deals with buying things that don't go directly into your product. So you're a baseball bat manufacturer, but you're going to need to have vehicles to move the bats around. You're going to need to have someone cut your grass and a security service, perhaps, if you have a security team. Those are all indirect costs. They're not the actual cost of making a baseball bat. Now, the wood to make the baseball bat, the burner to burn your name in, the equipment that turns, the lathe that turns the bats, those are all direct procurement items. And indirect and direct are handled differently from a tax perspective. That's why they're kept separately. So know the difference between direct and indirect, and also understand that a direct for one company can be an indirect for another. So at a shopping mall, the lawnmower they use to cut the grass outside the mall by the sidewalks is an indirect item. It's not a raw material for a shopping mall. But if you are a landscape company, that would be a raw material, be a direct procurement item for you. So what you have to think about is the type of business and what they're buying, and is this a raw material for your end product or good? That's the difference between direct and indirect procurement. The other big finance item we talked about were OPEX and CAPEX. So if you remember correctly, operational expenses are the day-to-day things that you need to operate. So they would come right out of your budget. You spend $1 on office supplies, and your budget amount for that year goes down by $1. Daily operating, day-to-day type expenses to run a business. Capital expenses are investments in equipment, facilities, investments in your future, things that you're going to use over a number of years that are absolutely essential to your business and make your business more efficient. So things like heavy machinery. Let's go back to our baseball bat factory, right? The day-to-day operations, again, cutting the grass. Broom to sweep the floor. The things you need for the day-to-day operation. Capital expenses would be a new lathe or a new automated lathe that makes 100 bats in an hour. Those types of things can be spread out. The payments on those, if you will, the company has to buy that. They have to pay the person who sells you that lathe right up front. But for your purposes in budgeting, you can say, this is an item I'm going to use over the next 5 years. Therefore, I'm going to take 1/5 of it each year against my budget. Because if you had a budget for $1 million a year and that lathe cost $2 million, you could never buy it. Think about that. You'd never have enough money in your budget to buy it. So from a tax perspective and a use perspective, you're able to spread your payments. Even though the company's budget, it comes out a little at a time, and those payments are considered depreciation against the capital asset. So just remember that the reason that you use capital is to buy big, future-proofing items, if you will, items that are essential to your business, that are expensive, that you're going to use over multiple years. It's not a disposable item. And you want to take payments, if you will, to show on your books that you're paying for it a little bit at a time out of your budget each year. Even though the company has to shell out all that money, your budget couldn't afford to do it. So therefore, on your budget, you're going to capitalize that item and push it across the line that way. So we had a number of readings so far this semester. There are 3 that I think you probably should concentrate on, although you should know them all just in case. But the Kent Howard article that we read first, the 2019 Kent Howard article on ESRM, and it put forth that whole plan, build model. That is a continuous improvement model because it goes in a circle. Any model that goes in a circle and takes you right back to planning again is really a continuous improvement model. And that's what he suggests. On top of his ESRM, he constantly talks about and shows a model for refreshing that program on a regular basis, on a constant basis, in a circle. Keep coming back to the plan again, top of the model. That's continuous improvement. We listened to David Quilter, a short interview during GSX week, and he talks about how he helps others and understands their needs. And there's a word for that. Just kind of understand where he's coming from, what he's talking about, and be able to summarize that. And then we had the DHS articles on facility security committees, which is a very interesting concept. It's a great concept, quite frankly, because it does force an ESRM model. But there was some unique things that may or may not work in a hierarchy like a business where people outrank each other and not everybody has the same priorities. Protecting the building at a DHS facility, everybody has that same model. But with the various things that a business for profit has to worry about, everybody has to worry about, do they have enough money to do the other things they want to do? So they may want to shortchange security, or they may think their risk is more important than somebody else. So that the one man, one vote thing for the Facility Security Committee might be a problem. And we talked about that at great length in our discussions this week. So just kind of think about the Facility Security Committee model and what might be some downsides to it when you put it into a for-profit business. So let's just talk about the 2 different types of questions. And the multiple choice, a lot of people on the quiz that we had didn't get the all of the above questions. They chose all of the above because it always seems to me like when that is an option, people want to gravitate toward it. So here's what I'd like you to do. Just use a real strict process. Forget the all of the above and read the other 3 choices. If one of them is clearly incorrect, it clearly doesn't fit, it's just not right, you can eliminate that one. And then also all of the above, because it couldn't be all, right? Now you're down to a 50-50 shot. And of those 2 remaining answers, one of them will be the best answer. Might be a little tough, you have to make a judgment call, but that's what being a security manager is all about, is making judgment calls based on sometimes not full information. And that is a skill that you need to hone. So get used to that on these quizzes. But if you haven't all of the above, look at the other 3 and see if one of them is clearly not right. If all 3 of them are right, then all of the above is the correct answer. But just need to eliminate one of the 3. Now you've eliminated two options. And look at it that way. Go through process of elimination always when you have an all of the above or none of the above type selection. And finally, true-false questions. When you look at a true-false question, you are answering it in the context of this course. So I could have a true-false question that says, Dr. Wisniewski is a handsome gentleman. And if I stand between Tom Cruise and George Clooney, I would say that is probably a false statement because I am nowhere near as handsome as those 2 gentlemen. If I stand between a horse and an alien, I got a pretty good shot of that being a true statement. I guess depending on where the alien comes from. But so context is very important in true-false questions. The context for our true-false questions is this course. So a true or false answer on one of our tests will always be in the context of this course. So don't overread the question and think, well, if this happened, then this happened. Think about what we learned in the course. And somewhere in the course, the answer to that true-false question is there. It's on a slide. It's in a reading. It is spelled out very clearly somewhere. Think about it in the context of the course. Because I noticed a number of true-false questions that people had written to me about and say, well, what about this and what about that? Their arguments were potentially valid, but not in the context of the course, not in what we are covering in the course. That is where all of these questions come from. So, with that, this was a very short study guide, 15 minutes. But I think if you go over it and you think about it and you prepare yourself and your documentation, I think everyone has the capacity to get a perfect score on this exam. I really do. I don't think it's as hard as the last quiz. But then again, I don't know what tripped up a lot of people on the last quiz either, and because there were only 2 questions really that everybody consistently missed. Other than that, it was kind of all over the board. So we will take it in stride and see how this goes. But again, context of the course, use the study guide, look at it again. It only took you 15 minutes. I'd look at it again because a number of the questions may be answered through this study guide. And just try to do your best. Remember, this is 10 points of the 25. Or excuse me, it's even less than that. It is 1/3 of the grade of the midterm, not half. So do your best. If you have questions before you take the exam, I put a 2-hour time limit on it, but it's really not a limit. But you do only get 1 attempt. So open it up and do the quiz. You can't open it, close it, open, close it. Make sure you have the time to do it. I expect it to take no more than 1 hour, and I think probably less for most people, based on the amount of time most people used on the last exam. But again, there's a 2-hour limit because it had me set a limit. And if someone goes to 2 hours and doesn't finish, please let me know that right away. I will open that back up because I can see that if you were actively working on it during the 2 hours or if it was just running. So again, just let me know about that. Everyone, good luck. Contact me if you need me.